Hello and welcome back to Top 5 Mondays, and today's installment has been suggested by, again, sorry I forgot to look it up beforehand, but thank you very much for the suggestion. It is Top 5 Sequels. This is a tough one, and I could really just throw a lot of films into the mix here. I almost contemplated doing a top 10 list, but I think it's probably best if I just stick to 5 on these videos and just call it Top 5 Mondays. So I'm going to do that. Give you a few honourable mentions at the end. But there's a lot to think about when it comes to movie sequels. You know, you can go with a second sequel, or maybe a third, fourth, or fifth sequel, depending on what kind of series you're talking about and what your tastes are. For me, it's going to be more genre movies, really, because that's what I enjoy more. But there's 2 in there that I think are very good, serious films. So let's crack on with the list and get right into it. Very quickly, before we get into the main part of the video, I haven't included any of the Star Wars films because Empire Strikes Back is my favourite film ever, and I'll just end up using it all the time for stuff like top 5 science fiction, etc., etc. So if I was being completely honest, it would be Empire Strikes Back would be number 1, but just for the sake of making it more interesting, I'm not including it in the list. 5. Before Sunset. This is the sequel to the 1995 film Before Sunrise, and this came out in 2004, 9 years after the original. And it's a movie that never needed a sequel, or a movie that was never expected to kind of produce a sequel, because it was a movie that I think a lot of people loved, but it wasn't a big success. It didn't make that much money. So, by all rights, this film should have never happened, but it happened because the people involved were really passionate about it, and they wanted to make it, so they made it. Richard Linklater, the director, who's directed things like School of Rock and, Dazed and Confused, loads of great films. He's a brilliant filmmaker, Richard Linklater. A lot of diverse movies in his filmography, and probably my favourite of his are the Before films. Of course, there's Before Sunrise, Before Sunset, and Before Midnight. 3 of my favourite films ever, arguably almost a perfect trilogy, which I hope will continue beyond a trilogy. I won't go into the story too much, but it's basically about these 2 characters who met in 1995. They spent this day together, and that's what the film is about. And then in 2004, this film, Before Sunset, came out, and it's a real-time film, as opposed to the first one. The whole film is like one continuous take. I mean, the camera angles change and stuff, but they're mostly comprised of very long shots of them walking and talking around Paris. And I won't get into the story beyond that, because I think everyone should watch these films, especially if you like romantic films and you're not averse to them. You should definitely check them out. Ethan Hawke, Julie Delpy, fantastic in this, and this film was just the perfect companion piece, the perfect follow-up, and the perfect conclusion to the story of Jesse and Celine. Then of course they made this year Before Midnight, another 9 years after Before Sunset, but Before Sunset to me is almost a perfect film. I absolutely adore it, it's fantastic. 4. The Dark Knight, yes, low on the list, I guess. I mean, I know everyone loves The Dark Knight, and I love it too. I mean, it's on this list. Again, it takes everything that Christopher Nolan introduced to the Batman world, the cinematic world in 2005 with Batman Begins, and it just makes it even better. And again, I've talked about this film before. I mean, it was in the first Top 5 video I did, Top 5 Batman movies. It's like Heat with Batman and the Joker. It's fantastic. And I can't recommend, well, I was going to say I can't recommend it enough. I think everyone has seen The Dark Knight. I think people who don't watch movies normally have seen The Dark Knight. There was so much buzz around it, particularly over Heath Ledger's performance, and rightfully so. He's fantastic. This movie has been talked to death, but it's got to be in there for me because it is far superior to Batman Begins. I know a lot of people actually prefer Batman Begins, and that's cool, but for me it's a much better film, a much more satisfying experience. And I just think that Batman Joker story is always going to be the best incarnation of Batman, as long as they do it right anyway. So there's that. But for me, Dark Knight has to be on this list. 3. The Godfather Part 2. Yes, this is widely considered to be one of the greatest sequels of all time, for good reason. I hadn't seen this for many years, and The Godfather in general, I was like, oh, it seems a bit boring, I wasn't that interested in it. In 2009, I bought the VHS tapes for all 3 films, in 2009, and I watched them and I loved them. Well, apart from the third one. The less said about that, the better. It wasn't terrible, but Godfather Part 2 was a much more gripping film to me. I mean, the first one's a classic, widely considered to be the greatest film of all time, and you know, my good buddy, old pal Ryan Chataway considers that his favourite film of all time, and many others do as well, and that's fine. But I much prefer the second one. We see more of Michael Corleone, played by Al Pacino, and his rise into kind of power, I guess you could say, but also his descent into madness. You know, I mean, it's been a long time since I watched the film, but it was a much dark. Well, I don't know if it was much darker than the first one, but it just felt a lot more gritty and raw to me, especially the scene that he has with Diane Keaton, where they're kind of just shouting, and it was just a really emotional scene. The likes of which wasn't in the first one, for me anyway. I mean, again, you know, I just think it's a much more interesting film as well, because we get two storylines. We get to see Michael Corleone's father, who's famously played in the first movie by Marlon Brando, now played by Robert De Niro in the second film in the early 1900s. And we get to see his kind of rise in America when he first comes over to America, and then goes back to Italy, and that whole storyline was brilliant. And I just thought that it was perfect. De Niro and Pacino, you know, playing two sides of the same coin, in a way, I guess you could say. And it was just a brilliant, brilliant film. I can't wait to see it again. I mean, again, I've only seen it in VHS quality, so I'm sure the Blu-ray is going to blow me away. But for my money, Godfather Part 2 is the better of the two. The better of the three, in fact. And, you know, I guess some people will probably look at what I put as number 2 and 1 in this video and say, how can you put those above Godfather Part 2? But the gangster genre isn't really like my full deal. You know, I'm more into genre movies, but I can't deny how great that movie is, and I can't wait to watch it again. 2. Terminator 2, Judgment Day. I mean, how can you fault this movie? This movie is fantastic. Came out in 92, I believe, or 91, after the Terminator in 1986. Was it 86? 85, I think it was 85. Aliens was 86. 84, I think it was 84, sorry. I felt bad that I didn't remember the dates for the Godfather movies. I think Terminator was 84, and Terminator 2 was 91. Early 90s anyway, so it's been quite a while. You know, in the Terminator, it really made Arnie a huge star. He'd already done Conan, I think. I'm not sure which came out first. But anyway, by 85, Arnie was becoming very prominent. I mean, he was already famous from his bodybuilding and stuff, but now he was really, you know, on the scene, and he did a lot of movies in the late 80s. And so when the early 90s rolled around, he was a marquee, you know, top of the world, literally, movie star. And you think, how can they top, you know, the Terminator? The Terminator was just, this is a classic. Terminator is a classic movie. So what James Cameron did, very smart, and exactly what he did with Aliens. He took a sequel to a really popular, you know, kind of science fiction movie, and he didn't redo it. He did something different with it, while still retaining some of the same tone, but adding something different to it. And where the Terminator was dark, very singular, you know, just I think most of the Terminator takes place over one night, you know, and very just kind of, you know, it's a through line, you know. It's Kyle Reese, Sarah Connor, the Terminator. They've got to, you know, not get killed by him, basically. Terminator 2, bit more complex. You know, you got you know, the role reversal with Arnie coming back as a Terminator, but this time on the side of Sarah Connor and John Connor. We have Robert Patrick playing a new Terminator, a villain, the villainous Terminator, who's this liquid metal, you know, Terminator, which was really cool. And I think the special effects of the time were cutting edge, still hold up today. I just remember being in such awe of this film when I was growing up, and I remember my cousin Jamie was watching it once, and I don't know, they just had this magic about it. And I think I might always prefer it to Terminator 1, even though I love the Terminator. There's just so much more going on in Terminator 2 without it diminishing its effect. I don't know, James Cameron is just such a great filmmaker. I hope he pulls this off with Avatar and makes a much more interesting movie with Avatar 2. Because, you know, so far with sequels, he's hit them out of the park. And I hope one day he actually gets around to making Titanic 2, because I think that can be really good. But the Terminator 2, for me, it's just such a brilliant film. So much, it's again like Aliens. It's all out action. You know, the first film was much more kind of cat and mouse. The second one is balls to the walls action, balls to the wall action, and fantastic. I mean, everyone loves Terminator 2. Quotable, fun, dark, very dark. I mean, that image of the kids, you know, Sarah Connor's nightmare of these kids getting kind of blown away by this kind of nuclear holocaust, and she's holding onto the fence, and her skin gets blown off, and she's just a skeleton screaming. It's a really dark film, and you know, no fate and all this. Oh, it's just brilliant. Terminator 2 is one of the best genre films ever made, and for me, you know, just awesome. Again, I'm just repeating myself now, but Terminator 2, definitely one of the best sequels ever made. 1. What could it be? What could it be? I mean, there's been many great sequels, you know. I mean, I could go with The Two Towers, you know, the continuation of the Lord of the Rings story. I could go with Return of the King. So far I've only done, you know, number 2 sequels. I could do, you know, Dream Warriors in Nightmare 3. I could do New Moon, you know. I thought that was a great film after the masterpiece that was Twilight. But no, the number 1 sequel for me is one of my all-time favourite films. It is in fact the first film I ever saw when I was 0. I'm not sure if I told this story before. My mum used to put this film on when I was a baby, so don't judge her. But it actually used to shut me up, and I'd sit there and just kind of, you know, not be a nuisance, I guess. And one of my earliest memories is a kind of dream of this. Not a nightmare, but a dream of this film. And when I grew up as a kid, I was really interested in seeing it again. And my mum was quite liberal. You know, I've mentioned this before. And I did get to watch 15 and 18 movies when I was, you know, I'd say maybe 12, 13, 14, something like that. And I watched it again. And not only is it a fantastic film, I really related to my mum. And especially with the main character, because around that time she kind of looked a bit like her as well. And so there's a real nostalgia kind of link that I have with this film, why I love it so much. And I also think that, I don't know if it's better than the original. The original is a masterpiece, and probably better than this one. But I prefer this one. I prefer the sequel, the second one, because it's just so much fun, and it's just so great. It's pretty much the same as Terminator 2 is to the Terminator, I think. And it is Aliens. James Cameron once again. I've never thought about this, but Terminator 1, Terminator 2, Alien and Aliens, it's a very similar jump, you know. Alien and the Terminator are both very dark, you know, films that are very kind of simple in a way, you know, and then the ideas get expanded in the sequel, and it's not as dark, it's a bit more action, a bit more fun, you know, well, not fun, but you know, it's a bit, yeah, you can have a laugh with it. But it's still quite deep and intense, and yeah, Aliens is just brilliant. I mean, you got Sigourney Weaver coming back, and years after the original Alien, and it's just a whole different ball game. And you add more aliens to the picture, and that could have really ruined it. But for some reason, James Cameron made it work. It really added to everything because of the great story that he wrote, and he really took what Ridley Scott did with the first film, made it his own, and created a fantastic movie with a brilliant cast, great production design, awesome music. I mean, it's just an epic film that I'm probably going to talk about in depth another time, but for me, Aliens is my favourite sequel of all time. So that's my top 5. What are your top 5 favourite sequels? What are some of your favourite sequels in general? For me, there's others that could have made the list. Spider-Man 2 was definitely close to being on there. Back to the Future 2. The Lord of the Rings movies, though, I really consider that one film, really. There's loads of great sequels out there, but for my money, those are the 5 best, or the 5 that I really, really love. And yeah, you're never going to be Aliens for me. I just love it. And again, I hope James Cameron does something really special with Avatar 2, because I know that a lot of people don't like the first one. And I really did like it. I didn't love it, but you know, people really seem to hate on Avatar. So I'm hoping he can kind of, you know, make something really more complex, but maybe a bit more fun, but still with, you know, the same kind of things that made the first one so good, in my opinion. Because I really liked Avatar. But that's a whole other thing. I could get carried away with these videos, but that's my top 5 favourite sequels. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.
He says he's really cool, but I think he's a tool. Even though I'm sure he's a quite nice guy, really. He's a quite nice guy, really.